This is Stories for Sleep, the hidden origins of Christmas traditions around the world, Part 1. A relaxing Christmas sleep story for grown-ups, exploring the legends and folklore behind the traditions we still celebrate today. Tonight we begin where winter runs deepest, in the forests and candlelit villages of Europe. Why do we bring evergreens indoors each December? Who is the Grey Mare who knocks on doors in Wales? Or the Tomte who keeps watch over barns in Sweden? How did a poor widow in Ukraine awaken to find her Christmas tree spun with silver and gold? And why does an old woman in Italy still sweep the stars each winter night? Every story carries a spark of returning light, the promise that warmth endures through the darkest nights. Good evening, traveller, and welcome to Realm and Reason. If you'd like to drift through more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe before you fall asleep. Now, take a deep breath in and let it go. Before we begin, let's put your body to rest. Start by resting your attention at the top of your head. Notice the sensations, not just the image of the body, but the feeling of it. Slowly move down through your body, spending about 5 seconds on each part. With every exhale, let that area soften. Imagine your breath traveling through each place you focus on, releasing tension as it flows. Keep moving downward through your eyebrows, your cheeks, your neck and shoulders, your hands and fingers, down through your legs to the very tips of your toes. And now, release the whole body, let yourself drift and rest. Before we begin tonight's travels, let's settle in. Wherever you are, a quiet room, a late-night train seat, the gentle hush of a dark house. Imagine a single hearth, its light flickering against stone. Outside, snow drifts past the window. Inside, the world is still. Christmas has always been more than a date on the calendar. It's a season of stories, of people gathering close, sharing warmth while the wind presses at the door. Every culture that meets winter tells these stories in its own way, and though they speak in different tongues, they share the same quiet promise that even in the darkest night, light returns. So tonight we'll travel, not by map, but by memory and myth, from forest to village, mountain to city, following the small glows that mark how the world celebrates hope. Some of these tales are ancient, carried through centuries by word of mouth. Others were written only a few generations ago, but feel much older, as though they've always been waiting by the fire. We begin here, at the hearth. A hearth is more than just a fireplace. It's the centre of the home, the place where warmth gathers and stories are born. Long before books and screens, families told their legends beside the coals. They spoke of evergreens that never died, of spirits who guarded the farm, of kind old travellers who brought gifts from faraway hills. I've always loved the sound of those stories, not because they're loud or grand, but because they're steady. They move at the rhythm of breath and heartbeat. They remind us that magic isn't only in miracles. Sometimes it's in the patience of people keeping a candle lit through the long night. As we travel tonight, we'll pause at 10 such candles, each from a different corner of the world. You may recognize some of them. A grandmother searching the stars, a kindly witch on her midnight ride, a spirit in the stable watching over sleeping animals, a miser in London learning to open his heart. Others you may be hearing for the first time. Each story carries a little of its homeland, the taste of its air, the music of its language, the shape of its snow or sand. We'll meet the Welsh Grey Mare, who dances through the streets in winter song, the Basque charcoal burner Olent Cerro, whose laughter warms the mountains, the Mexican flower that bloomed from faith, and the lanterns that glow across oceans. By the time we return to this hearth, I hope you'll feel as though you've walked through many nights, yet never left the comfort of the fire. Because the world, in its quiet way, shares one great story, a story of light remembered and kindness reborn, told again each winter to remind us we belong to something gentle and enduring. So, settle in. Let the light fall softly on your thoughts. And let's begin with the first story, The Gift of the Evergreen. The Gift of the Evergreen. In the heart of the northern forests, where the pines grow close enough to hush the wind, there lived a woodcutter named Ansel. He lived in what we would now call Germany, though in his time it was not yet a single country, only scattered villages bound by forest paths and shared winters. It was the 15th century, an age of guilds and small churches, of travellers who carried news by foot and faith that wove the old ways into the new. The long winters ruled the rhythm of life, and survival still depended on how well you could read the seasons. Ansel's home stood on the edge of the Harz forest, a vast and ancient woodland that stretched farther than any man could walk in a day. It was a land of timber and iron, where the mountains breathed cold mist and the rivers froze solid by December. The people there lived close to the earth. They believed the forest had a spirit of its own, not only in story but as something real and watchful, woven into every fallen leaf and standing trunk. To fell a tree was not a simple act of labour. It was a quiet bargain with the woods themselves. Ansel was an ordinary man, broad-shouldered, slow to speak, known for his honesty and for his steady hand with an axe. Each morning he would walk into the white wilderness to cut timber for his village, wrapped in furs and silence. His breath steamed in the air, and every sound, the creak of frozen branches, the distant snap of ice on the river, echoed like a whisper. Winter that year came early and hard. The snow piled high over the roofs, and the sky stayed dim even at midday. The villagers still spoke of Yule, the old midwinter festival that honoured the returning sun, though the priests now called it Christmas. In those days the two were not strangers. Old and new belief shared the same fire. People prayed to Christ by day and still left bread or apples for the forest spirits at night, just in case. Ansel knew those customs well. He was not a superstitious man, but he had learned that respect for the unseen kept a person humble. One morning, near the shortest day of the year, he set out deeper into the forest than usual, looking for timber strong enough to last through the thaw. The world was colourless, only white snow and grey bark as far as he could see. But then, through the mist, he saw something that made him stop. In a small clearing stood a single tree, green and living, a spruce tall, full and shining faintly in the pale light. Everywhere else the forest lay bare and silent, but this one tree seemed untouched by the cold, as though it remembered another season entirely. Ansel stepped closer. The snow around the tree was soft and unbroken, and the air smelled faintly of pine resin, sharp and clean, a scent that carried something alive. He reached out and brushed snow from the lower branches. Beneath the frost, the needles gleamed deep green. Then, for a moment, he thought he heard something, not a voice exactly, but a kind of whisper through the boughs, like wind through a hollow flute. It seemed to say, "This tree remembers the sun." He stood still, listening. The forest offered no more sound, only the steady silence of winter. Hansel lowered his axe. He felt the haft, the handle, worn smooth by years of work, settle against his palm as if the tool itself understood. The blade, which had always answered winter with clean, bright blows, seemed suddenly out of place before this green life. He set the edge gently to the snow and stood very still. For a breath he listened to his own breath. The forest answered with its old language, the hush of distant branches, the soft settling of frost, the faint creak that trees make when cold tightens them, like a door sighing on its hinges. A thought rose in him that felt older than words. Not every living thing that stands before you is meant to be taken. He reached out and touched the trunk with his glove. Then, wanting to feel it properly, he slipped the glove off. The bark was cool and slightly rough but alive, not the dead chill of timber ready for the shed, but the quiet thrum of sap deep within. Sap, the tree's lifeblood, thin as honey in winter, moved slowly under his fingertips, and with it came the bright scent of resin, that sharp, clean note that lingers when you've cut fresh boughs at home. He could not bring himself to harm the tree. It wasn't fear and it wasn't superstition. It was a kind of recognition, the way a person recognizes a face in a crowd and knows, without explanation, that it matters. The spruce stood not as wood to be taken, but as a keeper, the sort of tree that carries a memory through the dark months, holding a little of summer the way embers hold fire long after the flames die down. So he did the thing his father had taught him for places that felt holy, heiliger Ort, a place set apart. He pressed his open hand to his chest, a small promise, "I will not be careless here," and then he bowed his head slightly as one might to an elder whose counsel you respect. When he straightened, he lifted the axe not to swing, but to rest it across his shoulders, a sign among woodcutters that the day's taking was done. He walked backward, a step, so he would not turn his back too quickly on what he honoured, and then turned toward the path home, placing each boot in the prints he'd made on the way in. Behind him, the clearing closed again into quiet, and the green among the white seemed to glow a little brighter for being spared. That night by the fire he told his neighbours what he had seen. At first they laughed, for every winter brings strange tales when the nights grow long, but something in his voice silenced their amusement, a kind of reverence, quiet but firm. The next day, a few of them followed him into the woods, and there they found the tree exactly as he'd said, green, tall, shining, even under the grey sky. Among them was an old woman named Marta, known in the village as a healer and keeper of the old ways. She had lived through more winters than anyone could count, and when she saw the tree she whispered, "Waldkind," the forest's child. She said the spirits of the wood sometimes sent such signs to remind people that life endures even when the world sleeps. The evergreen, she told them, carried the memory of sunlight in its sap, a promise that warmth would return. The villagers decided to bring a small sapling from the forest to their homes, not as a trophy but as a guest. Hansel chose one carefully, thanking the woods before he cut it. He carried it back to the village and placed it near his hearth, where the smoke from the fire curled gently toward its branches. That night, the children gathered around it. Marta tied red ribbons to its boughs. "Red for the sun," she said, "and for life that hides even in cold blood." Someone hung small apples on the branches, and another placed a candle beside it so the light would dance in the needles. It was simple, humble, but when the flame flickered across the green, the whole room seemed warmer. The scent of pine mixed with the smell of wood smoke and bread, and for the first time that long winter people laughed without forcing it. They began to visit one another's homes, sharing food and stories by the glow of their small trees. What had started as a single sapling became a village custom, one of several signs of midwinter hope that were appearing in the German lands at that time. Every winter after, families brought in a green tree to stand near the fire, to remind them that life continued beyond the frost. Years passed, and the custom spread from valley to valley, carried by travellers and traders. In time, the ribbons became ornaments of glass and gold. The candles became tiny flames of oil, then of light itself. But the heart of the story never changed. The evergreen still stood for hope, for the sun waiting behind the clouds, for the promise that no darkness lasts forever. People forgot Ansel's name, as people do, but each time a child hangs a ribbon on a branch or someone pauses to breathe in that sharp green scent, they are keeping his discovery alive, the tree that remembered the sun. A living spark in the dead of winter, the gift of the evergreen. The custom of bringing evergreens indoors and decorating them for Christmas is first clearly recorded in German-speaking lands during the 1400s and 1500s. The Grey Mare. In a quiet Welsh village nestled between rolling hills and the salt-touched air of the western coast, there lived a man named Bryn. Bryn was a cooper by trade, shaping barrels from oak and ash in a small workshop that smelled of smoke and beeswax. He lived in the Vale of Glamorgan around the 1850s, a time when the old custom still thrived beside chapel hymns and coal smoke, and when the winter nights could seem longer than ever remembered. The land around him was a patchwork of farms and stone walls, threaded with hedgerows and narrow lanes that wound toward the sea. The custom had been especially strong in the mid-19th century in this part of the Vale of Glamorgan, though no one was quite sure how far back it went. Winter came early that year. The wind from the coast blew sharp and salt-heavy, carrying a moan through the chimneys that made even the dogs curl tighter by the fire. Snow was rare in that part of Wales, but frost was not. It clung to the windows like lace and made the world glitter in the half-light of dawn. Bryn's village had a chapel, a tavern, and a cluster of houses whose slate roofs shone like wet rock after the rain. It was a place where people still spoke Welsh by hearthlight, where the stories of the ancestors were told in the same tone as prayers. On one such night, cold, clear, and faintly silvered by moonlight, Bryn was closing up his workshop when he heard it, a chorus rising from the far end of the lane. At first it sounded like the wind itself, but then came rhythm, the beat of feet, the ring of laughter, the bright peal of a fiddle string. He stepped outside, wiping sawdust from his hands, and listened. Through the night air drifted a voice, then another in answer. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone raised in those valleys. It was Punco, the old Welsh contest of verse and wit. Down the hill came the procession. At its front moved a figure both eerie and beautiful, the Mari Lwyd, the Grey Mare. The name, pronounced roughly Mari Lwyd, has been part of Welsh winter lore for centuries, though no one in Bryn's time could say how many generations it had endured. The Mari was a horse's skull mounted on a pole, the white bone gleaming ghost bright in the lantern glow, draped with a long white sheet that hid the person beneath. Ribbons fluttered from her crown, red, blue, green, and the empty sockets were sometimes filled with glass baubles or dark coal, to give her the semblance of eyes. Her jaw was hinged, and with a tug of string, she could make it snap, a sharp clack that startled strangers and delighted children. Behind her came the party of the Mari, a group of villagers wrapped in scarves and old coats, carrying candles and tankards. They sang as they went, their voices half laughter, half chant. At every door they stopped, and the leader called out in rhyme, "Open your door, good friends inside, the Mari Lwyd comes in with pride. We bring you song and joy and cheer, and ask for welcome ale and beer." Then from within the house someone would answer in kind, matching the rhyme with another. "We have no fire, we have no bread, the hearth is cold, the children fed. The Mari must wander till dawn's first gleam, for nothing here can warm her dream." And so it would go, back and forth, the visitors outside and the household within, trading verses until one side faltered or laughed too hard to continue. This was the essence of Poonsho, a playful duel of words, a game older than memory itself. When the household finally yielded, they would open the door and welcome the troop inside. Bryn followed the voices until he came to his neighbour's cottage, where candlelight glowed behind frost-blown glass. There stood the Mari Lwyd, the skull glinting beneath the moon, her ribbons trembling in the cold air. When the door opened, she dipped her head as if bowing, and the crowd poured in, laughter first, music second, and the faint scent of spiced ale third. Inside, the air was thick with warmth and the smell of peat smoke. Children hid behind their mothers' skirts, peeking at the strange white head that now danced through the kitchen. The jaws of the Mari Lwyd snapped once, click, and everyone jumped. Then came the laughter, loud and free, echoing off stone walls and low wooden beams. Food and drink were offered, bread, cheese, roasted apples, and a bowl of wassail or spiced ale, as the younger folk now called it. The drink was sweetened with honey and nutmeg, steaming in the candlelight. The name came from Was Hall, be healthy, but in these Welsh valleys it had simply come to mean the comfort of warmth shared. The Mari's companions drank deep, sang songs of harvest and faith, and when the bowls were emptied, they moved on to the next house. As they went, the sound carried through the lanes, the faint crack of the horse's jaw, the fiddler's tune, the laughter that rippled from one cottage to another. The whole village seemed to awaken, one hearth at a time. Bryn, standing in the snow, felt something shift inside him, a recognition that this, more than any sermon or feast, was what kept a community alive. The act of coming together in the dark, turning strangers into guests and neighbours into family. He followed the troop for a while, listening to the call and raspoon kos, as doors opened and closed ahead of them. The Mari Lwyd glided from shadow to shadow, her skull bright against the night sky, her ribbons like fleeting comets. At one point a gust of wind lifted the sheet and Bryn glimpsed a pair of boots underneath. Just a man from the village, laughing, carrying the weight of the skull like an old friend. He smiled to himself. The magic, he realized, was not in the skull or the song, but in the people who carried it. When at last he returned home, he left his own door unlatched. And sure enough, not long after midnight, he heard the knock. 3 raps, rhythmic and confident. He opened it to find the Grey Mare waiting, lantern, light glimmering in the hollows of her eyes. The leader of the troop called out the verse, and Bryn, grinning, answered in kind. He let them in, offered ale and bread, and when the Mari danced through his doorway, her jaw snapping and her ribbons brushing the lintel, he felt the year turn within him, as if winter itself had drawn breath. By dawn the streets were quiet again. Snow dusted the fields beyond the village, and a pale sun crept over the horizon. From house to house, faint traces of song still lingered, fragments of rhyme, echoes of laughter, and the warm hush of contentment. The Mari Lwyd had gone, but her presence remained, stitched into the air like smoke that refuses to fade. No one knew for certain how old the custom was. Some said it came from the ancient Celts, others from Christian carolling traditions that mingled with pagan rites. Some thought Mari Lwyd meant Grey Mare, a ghostly horse of midwinter. Others believed it meant Blessed Mary, a remnant of devotion from the age when faith was sung more than spoken. Whatever its roots, the meaning had settled somewhere between the two. A spirit half sacred, half playful, bringing blessing through laughter and rhyme. Even now, centuries later, in small Welsh towns and along the coastal roads, the Mari Lwyd still appears. Not always on horseback bones, but in song, in costume, in the joy of a shared night. And if you ever find yourself there in midwinter, and hear a knocking at the door followed by laughter and rhyme, you'll know she's come calling again. So if you listen tonight, perhaps as snow drifts outside your own window, imagine that pale skull shining beneath ribbons and lanterns, the sound of her jaw snapping once, twice, then falling quiet as voices lift in song. The Grey Mare has come, not to frighten, but to remind us that the darkest nights of winter belong to those who open their doors and share the light within. While the Mari Lwyd tradition is still alive today, the earliest written accounts date only from around 1800, suggesting the custom may be far older, though its origins remain uncertain. The Tomte's Watch. In a remote farmstead deep in the forests of northern Sweden, there lived a man named Einar. The year was 1891, a time when winter still ruled the rhythm of life, and stories of the Tomte had already been told for generations. Einar was a farmer of quiet strength, a man who measured the seasons not by calendars but by the way the snow softened the sound of the axe, by the feel of frost on his beard, by the slow rhythm of winter work. His farm stood alone in a clearing of birch and pine, where the world narrowed each winter to the warmth of a single hearth. The house was timbered from the surrounding woods, its boards darkened by smoke and time. A small barn crouched close to the home to share what warmth it could, and beyond lay open fields now asleep under snow. Inside, the air always carried a mingling scent of peat, pine resin, and the faint iron tang of the stove that burned through the long northern nights. Lamps were rare and light was precious. The family learned to love the glow of the hearth and the quiet hours it held. Einar lived there with his wife Ingrid and their 2 children. Each evening after chores were done, they would sit by the fire, mending tools or telling stories to pass the endless dark. Among all the tales told in the valleys of Sweden and Finland, none was as dear to the children as the stories of the Tomte, the small bearded spirit of the homestead. The Tomte, also called a Nisse in Norway and Denmark, was said to be the guardian of the farm. He was no taller than a child, dressed in simple grey with a red woolen cap that glowed faintly even in starlight. His beard was long and pale as frost, and his eyes bright as candle flame. He kept watch over the barn, the animals, the hearth, and the tools, ensuring that the work of the year was protected. Folklorists record the Tomte belief dating back to at least the 17th and 18th centuries on Swedish farms, and the familiar red-capped, bearded figure emerged in the 19th century, just the kind Einar's children imagined. When they whispered his name, he did not wish to be seen. He worked at night, mending what broke, tending to the animals, and brushing the frost from their manes. But he was particular about respect. The old stories warned that forgetting to honour him, or worse, offending him, could stir his temper. On Christmas Eve, when families left out their offerings, the porridge had to be served with butter, for failing to do so could anger the Tomte. A stingy bowl could bring mischief, spilled milk, tangled horsetails, or missing tools by morning. But a good portion, warm, creamy and rich, brought luck, calm animals, and a year free of hardship. I do not know if he believed in such things, but he respected the old ways. His father had left out porridge every Christmas Eve, and his grandfather before him. There was comfort in the gesture, a small acknowledgement that unseen hands helped keep the farm whole, and if nothing else, it pleased the children to imagine a watchful friend in the night. That winter was a hard one. The snow came early and stayed, heavy and unrelenting. Days passed in dim light, and the sun, when it appeared, was pale as watered milk. Einar checked the animals each night before bed, his lantern swinging as he crossed the yard, the air so cold it cracked with each step. He would run his hands down the horses' necks, check the chickens' roosts, and listen to the barn creak against the weight of frost. It was on one such night, the eve of Christmas, that the Tomte woke. He had been sleeping under the floorboards since autumn, his rest broken only by the scent of snow and the whisper of the barn in the wind. Now, as the family slept, he stepped quietly into the open air. His boots made no sound on the snow. His red cap gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and his small hands carried a stick worn smooth by centuries of use. The world was still except for the sigh of wind through the birches, but something stirred beyond the yard, a flash of movement near the henhouse. A fox, lean and desperate in the heart of winter, had come searching for food. The Tomte watched as it crept toward the coop, its breath steaming, poor silent the drift. He walked forward, slow and deliberate, until he stood between the fox and the door. Then, with a quick tap of his staff on the frozen ground, he broke the silence. The sound echoed sharper than it should have, a hollow crack that rang like stone striking stone. The fox froze, tail flicking. It looked up, and for an instant its amber eyes met the faint glow of the Tomte's. Whatever it saw, whether man, spirit, or something older, was enough. It turned and vanished into the woods, leaving only a thin trail of paw prints that the wind soon covered. The Tomte lingered, making sure the hens had settled again. He brushed the frost from the latch and patted the wood once, a farmer's habit in miniature. Then he went to the barn where the horses shifted in their stalls. He whispered softly to them, words in the old tongue that soothed like music. He checked the harness straps, tightened one buckle, and stroked a mare's neck until she sighed into sleep. Before dawn, he crossed the yard one last time and climbed the wooden steps to the house. Through the window, he saw the glow of embers still alive in the hearth. He stepped inside and found, waiting on the bench by the fire, a bowl of porridge, warm, rich, and crowned with a golden pat of butter. Ingrid had remembered. The Tomte's beard twitched with what might have been a smile. He set down his staff, climbed onto the bench, and ate slowly, every spoonful savoured with silent gratitude. When the bowl was empty, he wiped his mouth, nodded once toward the sleeping house, and disappeared back into the shadows beneath the floor. Morning came pale and clear. Einar woke early to find the storm had passed. The air was bright, the world blanketed in untouched snow. Outside, fox tracks led halfway across the yard before turning abruptly back toward the forest. The hen house stood unharmed. Inside, the bowl from the night before sat empty and spotless by the hearth. Einar smiled to himself but said nothing. Some truths were better left unspoken, kept warm like coals under ash. That evening, when the children asked again for a story, he told them this one, of the Tomte who watched the farm through the coldest night, keeping the animals safe and the family at peace. He reminded them that gratitude keeps a house strong, and respect, even for things unseen, keeps a spirit kind. Years passed, and still the family left out its porridge each Christmas Eve. Even as lamps became common and the old ways faded, the ritual remained. Because belief, Einar said, was not about proof, it was about remembering to care. Folklorists today trace the Tomte's roots far back, to spirits once tied to burial mounds, later to household gods, finally to the kindly red-capped figure of farmyard legend. The written record of Tomte tales reaches at least to the 17th and 18th centuries, but the image most people know, small, bearded, and gentle, took shape in the 19th. Stories like Einar's belong to that time, when folklore and daily life still shared the same breath, and perhaps on some winter night they still do. So if you ever wake to a faint creak on the stair or see the flicker of red by the window, remember the small spirit who keeps his watch. Leave a bowl of porridge by the fire with butter, always with butter, and whisper your thanks into the quiet. The Tomte is listening. The Christmas Spider. In the hills of western Ukraine, where the snow lies deep across the fields and the air smells faintly of pine and wood smoke, there once lived a widow named Halina and her 2 children. Their cottage stood on the edge of a small village, a humble house of a whitewashed clay with a thatched roof, a single room, and a stove that was the heart of their world. It was not much, but it was theirs. Halina had known better days once, before sickness took her husband and left her to raise the children alone. Now she worked where she could, gathering wood, spinning flax, mending clothes for neighbours, and though her hands were rough and her back tired, her eyes were kind. She would tell the children, "As long as we have a warm hearth and love between us, we have enough." And the children, still young enough to believe her, would nod and smile. But each winter, as Christmas approached, Halina's heart grew heavy, for in every home in the village, families prepared their Sviata Večeria, the holy supper that marked Christmas Eve. They baked honey cakes, cooked the 12 dishes of the feast, and hung small trinkets and ribbons on their fir trees. From the cottages came the sound of kolyadki, the old carols that wished health and happiness for the coming year. And when the first star appeared in the dark sky, the sign that the Holy Supper might begin, church bells rang from the valley and candles flickered in every window but theirs. Halina would gather her children close by the stove, feeding the small fire with the last of the wood. She would tell them stories of miracles and angels, of saints who once walked the earth in disguise, and the children, listening with shining eyes, would forget their hunger for a while. Still, when they looked at the corner of their room, the place where other families kept their Christmas tree, they could not help but sigh. One year, early in the spring, a pine cone fell from the forest's edge and rolled into their garden. The children planted it carefully beside the wall of the cottage, watering it with what little they could spare. By the time the next winter came, the sapling had grown taller than either of them. They were proud of it, calling it their Devo, their wonder, and they dreamed of the day when they might have a tree to decorate like their neighbours. When Christmas Eve arrived, the tree stood ready, green and full, its branches brushing the window pane, but there was nothing to hang upon it. No ribbons, no apples, no bits of glass or paper stars. Halina had spent every coin on flour and oil so that at least they might have bread for the Holy Supper. She looked at the bare branches and felt her throat tighten. The children tried to be brave, saying, "It's all right, Mama. The tree is beautiful, even plain." And though she smiled, her eyes stung with tears. That night, when the first star rose over the ridge and the village bells began to ring, Halina bowed her head and whispered a small prayer, not for wealth nor for gifts, but for her children to have joy in the morning. Then she tucked them beneath the quilt, kissed their foreheads, and watched them drift into sleep. Outside, the world was silent. Snow covered the roofs like icing on bread, and the forest beyond the cottage held its breath. But in the stillness, life was stirring, quiet, patient, unseen. From the corners of the ceiling and the cracks in the walls, small shapes began to move. Spiders, dozens of them, then hundreds, crept out of their hiding places. They were the kind that lived in barns and rafters, harmless and busy. All year they had watched Helena sweep the floor and tend her children. Now, as moonlight filled the little house, they seemed to sense her sorrow. One by one they climbed onto the Christmas tree. Their tiny legs made no sound as they spun their webs across the branches from twig to twig, from top to bottom, weaving delicate bridges of silk. They worked all through the night, each thread catching the moonlight like frost. The air shimmered faintly with it, and the house grew peaceful again. When the first light of morning spilled through the window, the children stirred. They rubbed their eyes and looked toward the tree. For a moment they could not speak. Then they cried out together, "Mama, come see!" Halina woke with a start, fearing something was wrong, but when she saw their faces, she followed their gaze and gasped. The tree stood bathed in gold and silver. Every branch was draped in webs so fine they seemed spun from glass. And as the sun rose, the threads turned to bright strands of light. The whole cottage glowed as though filled with treasure. Halina fell to her knees and crossed herself, whispering a prayer of thanks. The children laughed and clapped their hands, running in circles around the tree. They touched the shining threads, afraid they might vanish if they breathed too hard. To them it was magic, and to their mother it was mercy, proof that even in poverty there could still be wonder. Word of the miracle spread quickly through the village. Neighbours came to see, their voices hushed as they stepped inside. Some crossed themselves. Others simply stared, their faces lit by the golden light. And though the webs were gone by nightfall, melted back into the air when the sun set, the story remained. That winter, the widow found unexpected fortune. A neighbour offered her work spinning flax, another brought wood for the fire, and a cousin she hadn't seen in years sent a basket of apples from the next town. Helena would only smile and say, "The spiders wove our blessings." Every year after that, she and her children hung a small spider made of straw and thread on their Christmas tree, and the neighbours began to do the same. Some said it brought good luck. Others said it was to remind them that beauty can be spun from the humblest hands. Soon the custom spread from one village to another, until across Ukraine, people began to decorate their trees with spider webs, pavuchki, little spiders, woven of silver and gold. Even now, in some homes, no one will sweep away a web before Christmas, for it is said to be a sign of blessing. And when you see the tinsel shining on a tree, think of that cottage at the edge of the forest, the poor widow and her children asleep beneath a sky full of stars, and the quiet creatures who spun them a miracle in the dark. The legend of the Christmas spider is one of Ukraine's most beloved tales, shared through generations as part of Christmas Eve storytelling. It tells of a poor widow and her children who awaken to find their Christmas tree covered in spider webs that turn to silver and gold in the morning light. The story's origins are uncertain, but folklorists trace its written form to the late 19th century, and its imagery, webs shining like tinsel, may predate Christianity in the region, tied to older beliefs in the household spirits of hearth and barn. In modern Ukraine, spiders and their webs are still symbols of good luck, especially during the holidays. Families often hang pavuchki ornaments made of straw, paper or thread to bring fortune to the home. Some say the tradition inspired the invention of Christmas tinsel itself, the shimmering echo of those first golden webs that turned one family's poverty into joy. Even today, when Ukrainians decorate their trees, they sometimes whisper a quiet blessing, "May the spiders spin only good fortune here." Befana's Midnight Ride. In a quiet Italian village folded between olive groves and stone terraces, there lived an old woman named Befana. No one could quite say how long she had been there. She seemed as much a part of the town as the cobblestones or the church bell that called the hour. Her neighbours said she had been sweeping the same street since the world began. Her little house perched at the edge of the square, its walls the colour of baked clay, and its roof patched with uneven red tiles. Rosemary bush grew by her door, and beside it leaned her constant companion, a well-worn broom. By day she swept her doorstep, the narrow road beyond it, and sometimes even the path to the fountain, humming as she worked. The children teased her gently, calling, "Nonna Befana, if you sweep any harder, you'll sweep the stars from the sky." She only smiled and answered, "Perhaps one day I will, and then I'll sweep them back into place cleaner than before." Her house was small but neat. The scent of wood smoke and oranges drying by the stove drifted through its single room. She kept her shelves lined with jars of chestnuts and honey, the spoils of summer carefully saved for the long months of cold. On chill evenings, she could be seen carrying loaves of bread to neighbours, or mending torn shawls for children who outgrew their sleeves. Everyone called her kind, though a little peculiar, too fond of sweeping and too stubborn about it. Winter had come early that year. Frost clung to the vines, and smoke rose from every chimney as families prepared for the coming feast of Epiphany, the day the Magi, the three wise kings, would reach Bethlehem. The bells rang at vespers, echoing down the hillside, and the air was sharp with the scent of burning olive wood. That evening Befana was finishing her supper when she noticed a light outside her window. Not the flicker of a torch, but something purer, steadier. It was a star bright as a coin freshly minted, hanging low over the hills. She stepped to her door, broom in hand, and listened. From the quiet road came the soft tread of animals and the murmur of voices. 3 travellers approached, tall, cloaked, their faces aglow with the reflection of the star. They greeted her kindly. "Good evening, grandmother," said one, his accent strange but his tone gentle. "We follow the great star to find a child newly born, a king who will bring peace to the world. Will you come with us?" Befana blinked, holding her broom against her chest. "To find a king? Tonight? Oh, good sirs, I am flattered. But look at me, an old woman with a house untidy and bread unbaked. How could I greet such a child with ashes on my hearth? Let me sweep first, and when my work is done, I will follow." The travellers smiled, understanding but saddened. "The star will not wait," said the second softly, "but may it bless your home, Nona Befana." And so they continued down the road, their camels' hooves whispering over the stones, until both travellers and star disappeared beyond the ridge. Befana stood for a long time watching the empty road. Inside her home, the fire burned low. She looked around, the swept floor, the tidy table, the perfect order, and felt for the first time that her house was too quiet. The broom in her hand felt heavy. She sighed. "What use is a clean floor," she murmured, "if heaven itself passes my door and I do not go to meet it?" At once she began to pack. Into her satchel she placed small gifts, an orange, a handful of nuts, a few cakes, a tiny wooden doll she had carved for her neighbour's child. Then she reached for her broom, the same one that had swept her doorstep clean 1,000 times before. It seemed only natural to bring it, for what better gift could there be for a weary mother than a helping hand and a freshly swept floor? She tied her shawl, drew her door closed behind her, and stepped into the cold night. The stars shimmered faintly overhead, and the road stretched silver through the fields. She walked until her breath came in clouds and her boots gathered frost. The night deepened, the hills turned black against the sky, and her feet grew lighter with every step. At the crest of the hill a gust of wind lifted her shawl, then her skirts. The broom trembled in her grasp as if eager to move. Before she could quite understand, she felt the ground fall away beneath her. She gasped, half fear, half delight, and the broom soared, carrying her upward into the starlit sky. Below her, the world spread out like a patchwork of sleeping lights. She saw the curve of tiled roofs, the white bell towers, the rivers glinting faintly in the moonlight. She laughed, a clear, bright sound that startled the owls from their roosts. "Well then," she said, "if I cannot walk to Bethlehem, I shall fly to it instead." Through the long night she travelled, gliding over valleys and villages. She passed fields where shepherds dozed by their fires, vineyards rimmed with frost, and city squares where a single candle flickered in a chapel window. At every house where a child slept, she slowed, peered through the chimney smoke and whispered, "Perhaps the Holy Child lies here." From her satchel she left small tokens, a sweet cake, a fig, a bright orange, before rising once more into the cold sky. But dawn came too quickly. The great star faded into the light of morning, and she knew she had lost the Magi's trail. She hovered there for a while, broom swaying beneath her, then turned for home. As she flew, she thought of all the children she had passed, each sleeping in warmth and hope, and her heart softened. "If I cannot find the child," she said, "I will visit every child." Perhaps that will please heaven just as well. And so every year, on the eve of Epiphany, Befana mounts her broom once more. She rides the winter wind from roof to roof, sweeping away the dust of the old year and carrying her satchel of gifts. For the good children she leaves sweets and fruit, for the mischievous a lump of coal, though even that, they say, is soft and warm, meant to remind them that every fire can still burn bright again. In the quiet before dawn, when the air smells faintly of smoke and oranges, you might hear her passing, the whisper of her broom across the rooftops, the faint hum of her song as she sweeps the last dust of the year into the stars. And if you wake to find your stocking a little heavier than before, you will know that Befana has kept her midnight ride. Befana remains one of Italy's most beloved figures of the Christmas season. Each year, on the night of January 5th, the eve of Epiphany, she is said to fly from house to house on her broom, leaving sweets and small gifts for good children, and lumps of coal for those who have misbehaved. Her name comes from Epiphany, the feast that marks the visit of the Magi to the Christ child. In the oldest versions of her story, she is a humble woman who declines the Magi's invitation because she is too busy cleaning, only to regret it and set out after them with her broom so she can help sweep the new mother's house. Heaven, moved by her kindness, gives her the gift of flight so she can continue her search. Over time, she became part housekeeper, part kindly witch, part saint, a spirit of generosity who sweeps away the old year and ushers in the new. To this day, Italy celebrates her arrival with street festivals, sweets shaped like coal, and children's songs that call Viva la Befana, long live the good woman on her midnight ride.